Afternoon, everybody, from wherever you're watching in the world. My name is Williams and Noah, a second year graduate student at Johns Hopkins University. Welcome to the Johns Hopkins University Science Africa Association event. To let you know, this event has been put together by a team of amazing and brilliant young people. We have the president, Atinuke, from Nigeria. We have Hani from Kenya. We have Shizel from Spain and Oluwatosin Atala from Nigeria. And myself, Williams Noah from Nigeria. We welcome you today to this event and we hope that you would enjoy the event as we proceed further. Um, it is important to know that the issue of youth participation in politics is a very sacrosanct issue in a continent like Africa. And with the spirit of change and protest going on in the country, it is obvious that there is a demand for change and there's a demand for a change in narrative in the continent. According to a report or a research by Barometer, a think tank in Africa, about 65% of young people across 36 countries in Africa do not participate in election, in comparison to 79% of people above 35 that participate. The question we want to ask ourselves is what is the cause of this and what does youth across Africa need to do to improve their participation in politics? These issues we will be unpacking today in this event, and we have a lineup of amazing speakers who would be helping us unpack these issues. However, I would not be the one leading this journey. Sorry to say that. However, we have a very intelligent and brilliant individual who would be taking over this journey from here. And on that note, I hand over to Doc May. Hello, Mary.
Ah, hello. I didn't realize I unmute myself. Thank you, Williams. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. To give a little bit more of myself, my name is Mary Langen. I'm a fourth year PhD student at Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies, and I'm here on our Bologna campus with Hani and Williams, and I imagine hopefully some of our other participants at this event. And like William said, thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time today. It's a really illustrious bunch, and we're talking about such a timely and an interesting topic about youth and politics in Africa. And we're lucky enough to have representatives from across the continent, East Africa, South Africa, and West Africa. It's a big continent. We aren't going to get the full picture as far as 54 countries worth of democratic and autocratic experiences, but I'm hoping that today we can at least expose ourselves to a little bit about what's happening now, what are the challenges for youth participation, what are the opportunities for youth participation, and what are some of the big developments recently. So as far as our panelists, we're going to ultimately have four, and right now I'm very pleased to introduce Samson Itoto, who is a lawyer by trade and also the executive director and founder of YAG of Africa, and he's responsible for the Not Too Young to Run movement that has been responsible for changing the age of running for office in Nigeria, and it's a policy that's been adopted by numerous bodies, including the United Nations, across the continent and the world. We also have Honorable Chipoliro Nfinganjira, who is also a lawyer. We have a lot of lawyers represented here today. And he has served as the Chief Assistant Administrator General for the government of Malawi, and he's currently serving as a Member of Parliament representing the Democratic Progressive Party, and he has previously served as the Deputy Minister of Defense. And rounding out this wonderful panel right now is Ms. Schaefer Akore of Kenya, and she is a political activist and analyst, as well as the vice president of the Ukweli political party, and currently also serves as the senior policy advisor at Reed Strategies and a senior strategy advisor at Scope Impact. And as a side job, she also works as a newspaper columnist. So if that hasn't made you tired, we are just getting started. So I would love it if our panelists could do a little bit of an introduction of themselves, in addition to what I just mentioned about how they became involved in politics and activism. You are all done amazing things and you're so young. We'll try not to be too jealous. And then if you can give us a very brief picture into what the status of youth participation is in your country, that would be most appreciated. So perhaps we could start with Mr. Atodo, if you don't mind.
Well, thanks, Mary. I thought we were going to start with the only female on the panel, but if you don't mind, I'll gladly cede that opportunity as a female to kickstart the discussion.
Thank you, Samson. I would have, of course, just enjoyed you doing an overall introduction of all of us again, which I let you do. For those who don't know Samson, he's a wonderful friend. We've met in very cold circumstances in cold countries doing expeditious youth work. But coming back to who we are, of course, my name is Schaefer Akore. I do a myriad of things because I believe as much as I can that our world and the lives that we live and everything that we're trying to do is deeply intersectional. So I work very intentionally in 3 particular areas in policy, governance, and gender with a very deliberate feminist lens. And I say feminist lens here to mean that in order for us to actually understand the issues that the world is plaguing from the lack of representation, the lack of inclusion of women, the really struggling leadership crisis in Africa as a young continent and as a continent that continuously grows young, we have to understand the layers of the issues that exist. And we can only understand contextual layers if we have lenses that allow us to understand this issue. So one of those lenses is a feminist lens that enables us to understand why we also just have very few women in leadership, very few young women in leadership, very few unmarried women in leadership, very few young people who have the ideologies and aspirations of what the continent can and should be, right? So understanding the context is what I do. In another life, I sit on a myriad of also fantastical boards, trying to figure out how to bring young people on board. So I sit on the Gates Foundation Advisory Board for Goalkeepers, where we are talking about SDGs 1 to 6, trying to figure out how we get more young people doing great work in these areas, holding governments accountable, pursuing policy, encouraging policy implementation to be more geographically relevant and contextual and to be involving. I sit also on the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy Advisory Board to try and see if our foreign policies actually make sense beyond just representing, excuse me, what foreign policy is supposed to do, but how do we get people of color, African people of descent, into spaces of policy making so that the people who make policies and implement policies see that their decisions and their choices directly affect those who are not in the room. And of course, my side gig is writing. When I have time and I'm not sleeping, I write a lot about social issues because I try to occupy as much space as I can so that we can seed these spaces, because one of the things that young people are constantly being told is, oh, you have to go and get your space, you have to go and claim your spaces. But then the thing about spaces is they're not given, and you have to take them and you have to share them. So trying to multiply as much as political space, as much as social space, as much as also media space as possible, so we can have narratives that shape the continent, narratives that shape ideologies, and narratives that shape how we think and view ourselves. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. How did I become an activist? Gosh, long story. I think I've always been an activist. I've always been the curious child who's wondering why we can't do this, why there is not enough people who look like me in spaces that I should be, why not enough young people like Samson are not running for presidents in the continent, why not brilliant young people moving money and opening up borders and moving trade within the continent, right? So activism chose me before I chose it. And I think that's what happens also in my political journey, that politics chose me. I never thought I would be a politician. I always said politics is for old, wealthy, men. So someone like me who's young and clearly not old and clearly not a man, what was I doing in a political party, right? So it was realizing that all the work I was doing was political work, but it was political work in a different format, and it was political work in a different practice. So just pulling all of that together and saying, hey, I might as well join a political party that we can start shaping how the vehicles that get people into power, hold them accountable, fund them, create some sanity in how politics is perceived, is run, is done, and is also encouraging the people who get to participate as voters in the bigger picture. So yes, that is how I came to be, and those are the things that I do. So thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I think that's a theme we'll be coming back to, seeing ourselves broadly as the politicians, as the people that can make change, and what we can do to help other people realize that potential as well. Now, Mr. Ototo, I don't want to impose on you if you would prefer that Honorable Chipolero goes first, but if you would love to introduce yourself, that would be most welcome.
Well, thanks, Mary, and it's glad to come after. I call her my boss lady. So, if you think about a guy who is very interested in retiring old politicians from public office and retiring them to their homes to spend quality time with their grandparents, with their grandkids, and also provide advice to public leaders, I am that guy, because for me, the struggle to retire old and expired politicians from public office is the struggle of my life, and I do so because the continent, our dear continent, Africa, is plagued with leadership crisis, and leadership determines and defines everything. And so it's very important that, citizens and people who have competence, who have capacity, who have character get into public office. I'm one who is very concerned about the future of the continent. If you look at the macroeconomic policies that are designed by our political leaders, if you just look at just 1 year after the COVID pandemic, because it's just 1 year, look at the quality of decisions that our politicians have taken and how they've responded to the pandemic. It tells you a lot that we need more responsive, accountable, and transformative leadership on the continent of Africa. And there's no literature anywhere in the world that has debunked the fact that young people don't have the energy, they don't have the resilience, they don't have, the intellect and the creativity to contribute to the development of the society. What we need to do is to import these capacities and this innovation and the energies of young people into public leadership. And that's something that I'm committed to do. And so I am that guy. Secondly, I'm that guy who will not run for office, but will change and disrupt politics from the outside. Because if you look across our countries in Africa, there are limited number of elective seats. And so we all cannot get into public office. If you look at Nigeria, we're over 200 million. There are just about 11,000 elective seats. So only 11,000 people can get into those seats. Now, I believe that we can transform our society if we engage from the outside. And one of the things that I've done with my colleagues and with folks that I've worked with is building strong alliances with people who are in public office to chart, and redirect the course of public leadership in Nigeria. And I'm very proud and really excited about what we have achieved collectively, as a cohort and as a people. So I work for Yaiga Africa. I work in the Not Too Young to Run movement, but I'm just an active citizen who is just performing his own responsibility in changing society. Because if Africa is going to move from where it is today, then we as citizens will need to play our role. We need to go beyond, voting at elections to asking those fundamental questions of accountability on our leaders. But more importantly, we need to create pathways where people who understand what leadership is and can govern get into public office and not retain the status quo where politics in Africa is an old boys club.
Many thanks for that. So retiring politicians, we'll have to add that line to our CVs, perhaps. But speaking of politicians on the panel, Honorable Chipolero, would you mind introducing a little bit about your trajectory, which has included so many steps, despite being so young, and where you see the status of youthful Malawians and politics today? Thank you. I think you're still muted.
Yeah, hi Mary, and hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm just trying to check my age and see if I'm not within Samson's list of those to kick out. But yeah, I'm happy to be among these panelists with the good ideas already in the short space that they've just spoken. Yeah, I am a politician. I made the choice to go into politics because I thought we needed to try to change from within. Yes, there's a limited space, but I thought to myself, we need to get in. We needed to get our hands dirty a little. We needed to move from our comfort zones and to get in there and to try and shape the future for ourselves. I join the others in saying that, yes, indeed, politics was more or less an old boys club. When Schieffer was speaking, she said something that I picked up about old wealthy men. And then she said, well, I'm not old, I'm not a man, but she left out the worthy part where I thought I would add on. You see, the politics has become what I sometimes call politics of poverty, because we young people usually get in, and because we don't have the resources, we quickly get sucked into the way of doing things of the older generation, because they have the resources, they can dictate things. So it needs going in there and growing thick skin to say, look, I'm not an old wealthy man, but I can go in and try to change the mindset of fellow young people. So to me, really, I used to work for the government before. I saw that in the Malawian system, there's a point where you can rise up, you can get promoted up to a certain extent by the normal promotion setup. But then after that, it has to be the office of the president and cabinet that promotes people. So you have to have links with the politicians or with the technocrats in the office of the president and cabinet. And obviously, if some politicians don't like you, it will be difficult for you to move up after that normal promotion.
Oh, I think you're frozen for a minute.
Continue.
We missed the last 15 seconds, please.
Okay. Yeah. I think I was talking about how in Malawi, in the civil service, like I was a civil servant, but I went up to a certain extent where the normal promotion process can't continue. It seems like we're having problems with the network. Let me know if you can.
I can hear you. I think you're good. Or you were.
Jammed. Yeah. Well, if.
Yeah, we might be having a little bit of a delay right now, but I think we've got the picture as far as the idea that the political institutions and the system are not advantageous to newcomers. There's a lot of entrenched money and influence, if I'm getting your point.
Yeah, well, I was disconnected. Now I'm back. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you well.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, like I was saying, there's a point up to where you can get a normal promotion, where you can pursue or further your career in the civil service without involving some sort of politics, or without politicians making the decisions on who gets to further their career. So that to me gave me something that said, look, I would have to get into politics and be able to maybe make my own path. Another thing, I've talked about the civil service. Now, if we look at now even the judiciary, for our high court judges or Supreme Court judges to be put in those positions, it's the president that puts them in those positions. So they are at the mercy of politicians again. So you see, same thing in the legislature, in parliament. For one to rise to be a speaker, first of all, they have to be a politician, and then the other politicians have to vote them into positions. So it just came to me like everything is political. So I had to get in there and to try and influence some decisions in a positive way, and especially for young people. Like I said, young people get in and get sucked into the old ways of doing things, because the people they find in there are the ones who've got the resources. It takes quite special young people to maybe try to rise up to be president and things like that. But otherwise, most of our presidents in Africa and now, of course, in the US, they are old men. So we keep having to fight for the young people to get in those positions. So I'm hoping that the journey I've started.
I think we lost you there for a second, but the journey is starting. So taking it from that note, for those in the audience that aren't necessarily Africa specialists or political science specialists, just to set the scene a little bit more, we're talking about a continent of 54 countries with 1.2 billion people approximately, where the median age, as of the sources I found today, was 19.8 years old, under 20 years old, and 60% of the population across Africa is under 25 years old. So we've got a wonderful opportunity and a challenge as far as the opportunities for youth involvement and youth engagement. And I think that's the two ways that we often talk about youth or hear about youth across the world and in Africa. They're the future. They are the way that we're going to build better systems and better institutions. But at the same time, they're disadvantaged. They're, as all of our panelists have already said, they're left out of the political systems. They don't have the money. They're not necessarily enfranchised in the same way that they should be. So we've got the two sides. They're the future. They're full of opportunity, but they're also disenfranchised and underrepresented. And it's a massive amount of people that we're talking about in the three countries, at least, that are represented, and continent-wide. So taking it from there, we've had protests, revolutions, perhaps in the Sudanese case recently. We've had massive protests leading up to the Ugandan elections that were largely led by young people. We've had the End SARS movement in Nigeria, where we saw lots of youth engagement. And those are just a few of the examples of youth involvement that we've seen very recently. We're talking in the last few weeks. So there's no way to say that youth are not major players in African politics today. And I now see that our last panelist has arrived. So perhaps before I take the broad question of youth, challenge or opportunity to the panelists, we can perhaps let Honorable Mike Bengo introduce himself. Just to introduce him extremely briefly, Honorable Bengo has a long history as a sports presenter, which I believe is what he was actually doing today. And he also serves as a member of parliament in Malawi, representing the Malawi's Congress Party. So Honorable Mike, thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind giving us a tiny introduction and hello, we would appreciate that very much. You're muted for the sec. Oh, still muted.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I hope you can hear me now. Yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, my apologies. I was quite a bit busy with my background of sports, as you have already said. Malawi national football team had a game against Uganda in the Africa Cup of Nations qualifier. So the good news is that we have managed to beat Uganda by a goal to nil, and we have qualified for the Africa Cup of Nations to take place next year in Cameroon. So I was doing the commentary. I'm a football commentator, so I was doing the commentary. Later on, we had a huge traffic in the commercial city of Blantyre. So thank you very much. Of course, indeed, I joined you. So I'm Mike Bango, Member of Parliament for Kasungu North, representing the ruling Malawi Congress Party. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bongo, or Honorable Bongo. We really appreciate your presence, and congratulations on the victory. What a way to come into the panel. Thank you
very much.
Excellent. Now, I know I haven't mentioned it to our audience yet, but please feel free to put questions as we're having this discussion into the Q&A, and I'll keep looking at it, and maybe we can, do it as we go, or if we have some left after we've finished a few questions, we'll open it up to audience questions. So please feel free to put your questions in there. But to go back to where we are right now, we've had, some would say, an autocratic growing moment across the world, not only in Africa, but in Europe, and certainly the US hasn't been immune to it. So we've had these challenges to democracy. We've had uprisings across the continent, like I mentioned, the Ugandan elections, Sudan, the overthrow of al-Bashir, Nigerian protests. There's been a lot of movement. And we've also had this massive youth population. What I'd like to ask our panelists is, where do they see the youth in their country going from here? Is there going to be progressively more involvement in these formal political institutions? Or, as our panelists have suggested, are those pathways not conducive to joining, and are they going to find new pathways? And what does that mean for the future of democracy and politics in their countries and perhaps in the continent? I know it's a big question. If anybody would like to start, perhaps Honorable Mike, you haven't had a chance to talk much. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, the protests that have been happening, of course, we have had them here in Africa. We have mentioned about Uganda, where we've had some. This just simply shows that the youth would like to see things changing. The good part with Uganda, we also had a presidential candidate who is a young man. He has been into music circles, Bobi Wine. So we also had a large following, more especially the youth. So these protests, it has helped a lot. You'd also remember that in Malawi, we also had some protest towards, as we had re-elections here. most of the people who were doing those processes were the youth. I believe that the youth would like to be part of maybe making decisions. Of course, sometimes we do fail to follow the right procedures. That's why you see the youth joining protest so that they can make a difference in a society. So I'm sure these protests have helped a lot, not only in Europe, but also here in Africa. Such good example is Malawi and of course Uganda.
Thank you. Perhaps our other panelists have some thoughts. Feel free. Ms. Okore?
Yeah, I do have thoughts. I was actually just jotting down my thoughts as you said, Ms. Okore. First, I think your question is fantastic, but extremely broad. I will try to wrap it around and make sense of it. I think the most important, so first, one of the two most important things that come into my thoughts when I think of democracy is realizing how fragile of a theory democracy is. And we've seen this with the US, with the leadership of the outgoing President Trump, and what it meant to live in a country that is seen as a global leader and then just behave like it is a marketplace of violence and a marketplace of spite and hatred and lack of empathy and lack of concern for anyone who is vulnerable, who is living in the US, right? So that democracy is a deeply fragile theory of leadership. And what that also means is that we cannot let democracy be a theory that is run by good behavior, right? Like the hope that, oh my God, the leaders will behave well. Oh my God, at least something in their bodies or in their spirit will touch them to make them care. I think that is one of the things we need to understand, that it's not going to happen with democracy, right? So then the second most important thing is realizing that democracy is a continuous and consistent process of active leadership. And what that means is that democracy is hard, because it demands of us as people who participate even at the peripheries of what democracy is and what politics is and what power is, to play an active role, right? So whether we are participating as voters, whether we are participating as elected officials, whether we are participating as the people who are holding systems to get the voters and the elected officials together, we are all playing an active role, and that role has to be consistent, you know, and that we overall look at democracy as the ability to select leaders or to elect leaders, or in the context sometimes of countries that have autocratic leadership, as a process to install leaders, right? Because of bureaucracies and because of bangled elections and all of that. And so because of that, we need to understand that elections is just a part of what democracy does, you know, and that it's a process that leads us to doing many other things that we should be doing with our elected leaders, and how we should demand accountability and what accountability should be and how it works for us, right? Then this means that one, democracy works from a place of the first pyramid is the voters, beyond just the parties, just the voters. Where are the voters? Where are they in terms of their ideologies and what they think good leadership is and what they see themselves in terms of the role they play in getting these good leaders, right? Where are the voters? And number two, it is questioning the mediums that are there to get these people or to get these elected leaders. So are they political parties? Are they independently run, funded, supported individuals? And if they are in political parties, what are the policies that still hold political parties together? Because right now, and in my country, Kenya, we know that a lot of the political parties that exist are held together by wealthy individuals, which means that anyone with money can vie for political office, you know, and that we all know that just because you have money doesn't mean you're a great leader, you know. So then redefining and reimagining leadership is one of the ways in which I believe young people are going to play a fundamental role, you know, and we could mention the examples or the excellent exemplars that you have mentioned, which is Ugandans have been organizing. So people will look back at Uganda and say, oh my God, they've had one leader for as long as from 1985, you know. for as far back as they can remember, but nobody seems to see what it takes for state machinery, for state power, for old money, you know, and for the influence of foreign governments to hold in place a structure of leadership that has already failed and failed properly, and it has failed to see them. So they are organizing in a space where they can't breathe, literally. They cannot organize because of the violence that exists. They cannot express themselves. They cannot just say it hurts and this is where it hurts, right? And then you'd look at Nigeria and people would say, because I heard someone say, oh my God, the SARS movement is fantastic, but they still have the same leaders. And I'm like, you know, it's easier to dismiss what the SARS movement did because people are hoping that decades of systemic failure can be fixed in one moment, and that's where they fail. Instead of seeing the progress that has come, that people were able to speak, that young Nigerians were able to coalesce and were able to pull through and were able to hold forth for as long as they could in a structure that is already too violent for them to even be, you know? So I think also understanding that there's a process to democracy. So it's not an event. It's not a thing we'll wake up today and say, all of us in this Zoom call are going to democratically organize and we are going to have our own president in our own country. It's not going to happen in a day, because these things have to be built with time. So it's figuring out what do we need to lay as our base and as our anchor, you know? And if the people matter, then we start talking to the people and we start hearing their concerns and where they are in terms of thinking of governance and leadership and what leadership means for them. And we start building institutions around those ideals. And we start supporting and funding those structures that support these very ideals. And then we find people, you know, because the people are always there who are able to lead these particular ideals and make them actualize. So I think democracy is such a fragile concept of leadership, but I enjoy it because it makes space and it makes room for all of us to exist and for all of us to find a role to play in the bigger governance structure and in the bigger division of the political pie or the pie structure. I don't know what that is, but it allows room for that to happen. So yeah, I hope I've tried to answer your question.
That and then some. I love those themes. We've covered accountability, reimagining leadership, talking about active leadership, and better institutions. I think those are themes that resonate with CISers and with any student of politics. So thank you for all of that to think about. Mr. Atode, I know this is a theme that's close to your heart as far as accountability and free judiciary systems and better governance. Tell us what you're thinking.
No, so I think the two previous speakers have dealt with this question. I just, for the purposes of those who are joining this discussion, that when you look through this, the protests we're witnessing across Africa, it's just a struggle to reclaim the state. The state has been captured. That's something we know. It is public knowledge. And I don't think we need to debate that whether it's Uganda, Cameroon, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Mali, across Africa, the state has been captured. So institutions are unable to deliver on their mandates. You've got elections that are not, you know, democratic in every sense of the word. You've got political parties that are very, very weak. Weak in the sense that the internal mechanisms within the parties, the leadership recruitment process within political parties is very, very weak. You look at media, so there's just an assault on human rights across the continent. And so the state is captured. So when you see these protests, it's just an attempt to reclaim the state, you know, from these political elites that have captured the state. And that is why when you look at NSAS, you look at whether Free Senegal, you look at, you know, Ballet de Citoyen in Burkina Faso that kicked Blaise Compaoré out. If you look at the Fees Must Fall movement, there's one thing that connects them all, that young people are discontented with the status quo and they want the status quo to change. And that is just the responsibility that we all have, you know, as a generation. And it's a generational burden. So if you look through the different waves of whether you call it Africa Rising or liberalization or Africa's freedom, you see that at every point in time, a generation rose up and pushed back on, you know, all this political this repression and oppression from political actors. And so we need to celebrate these young people. But I think that the challenge of the protest movements have always been, to what extent, have these protests translated into meaningful societal transformation? And we need to link this first to the structure and the evolution of these movements. The ideology of the movement, the tactics, the structure of the movement, and the kind of leadership choices that are being made. We look at Egypt today, we look at Tunisia today, and we are very concerned that it appears that the country has not maximized the utility that the protest action actually led to. If you look at also NSAS today, yes, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, has been banned, but there are three schools of thoughts or three cohorts of people that have emerged. First, you see young people getting interested to get on the voters register because they want to vote at the next elections. That is an opportunity. You see young people interested in running for office. That's an opportunity. You see young people who want to promote accountability. But we can't stop at protests, because activism, or what you call civic vigilance or engagement, does not start and end with protest. We need to take it to the next level. And every society and every generation needs to define what's its own next level. Is it getting into mainstream politics, or just building, citizens' power to keep government in check? Like Frederick Douglass would say, the price you pay for liberty is eternal vigilance. And we have a responsibility to stay vigilant. We need to retain and continue protesting, but there's a limit to where protest can get us. Sometimes we need to negotiate. And I tell these social movements and civic activists, there's a place for negotiation. And when you negotiate, you're not compromising on your principles and your values and your standards. No, it's just the structure of governance that you need to come into the room and speak and negotiate. So if there's one thing I want us to take, particularly those who are pro-protest like myself, is there's a place for negotiation, and you've got to come to the table. And I always say this, in that room where decisions are made, if you are not in that room, you only become an agenda. And that is why we need to move from being agenda on discussion papers to actually being the real actors who are influencing decisions and altering the balance of power. And that is where we need to get to as a generation.
Thank you for all that to think about. Speaking of being in the room where the decisions are made and taking that step beyond activism, we have two members of parliament with us today, and I think that they have taken that step to try and sit at the table and to have youth voice counted. And I'm sure that they've experienced a lot of challenges that Honorable Chipolero has already laid out, as far as, yes, I want to represent youth. Yes, I want these better institutions, better systems of accountability. But in reality, I'm up against a machine. I'm up against a lot of money and institutionalized systems. I'd love to know how all of you who have, when you've been politicians or when you are currently politicians, how have you worked against those systems or found ways to work within the system that is moving the needle towards better governance, better accountability? Honorable Chipolero, I'd love to hear from you if you have any thoughts on how to move that needle from within the system.
Yeah, thanks again. You see, I'll give you an example. Mike and I are from different political parties. But what is happening a lot these days is that when we young people meet behind the scenes, we now start talking about young people and how we can raise each other up, how we can support each other. We sometimes leave our political ideologies aside, our party affiliations aside. And this is not happening just across political parties, but even political activists, some NGOs. People are talking behind the scenes like, we need to support each other as young people. We need to do things differently this time. Yes, Mike will have different political ideologies than I do, but we are now concentrating on those things that are common. So that is what I'm continually seeing. And I've also seen that in some of our leaders in Africa. I've recently seen leaders from Uganda, maybe meeting up with other young leaders from South Africa, leaders from Zimbabwe, meeting up with leaders from other countries. So it's going across, and what is happening is, like I've said, young people are realizing that these things have to change, and I believe that is going to continue, and we will at some point push out the older ones and bring in a different type of politics and different type of working together, where we feel, yes, we may differ in some ways, but at the end of the day, we want our institutions to be strong. We want to root out the corruption. We want to give equal opportunities, knowing that maybe for us also to get in the system was a bit of a struggle. We want to get rid of such things. So yeah, being in there is helping to do that. And slowly, as much as the needle is moving slowly, or the pushing the machine is not as easy as it looks, but it is happening behind the scenes, it is happening underground, and I believe we are going the right direction. It just needs young people to come together, to support each other. There are many ways that those maybe not in mainstream politics can help us. Even just a little Facebook post supporting a cause or something that helps, it goes a long way. The ones who are pushing against the right things, they realize that there's a majority out there that wants things done in a different way. And I believe in most African countries, it's actually the young people that are in the majority. So if the young people push for these things can be done.
Thank you for that. That really inspires me in terms of thinking broadly about how we can, like I said, move the needle, and this idea that thinking about youth as a block rather than as potentially different parties or having different special interests. A lot of the youth around the world are coalescing behind major ideas because we're all going to be affected by climate change. We're all African youth are being massively affected by unemployment. Everybody is affected by disruptions and global supply chains and interconnectedness in the world. So yes, there's a lot of issues where if you think of youth as a block, they're so much more powerful. And not to not think about women, because I think if you think about women as a block, there's a lot of changes that can happen too. It would be irresponsible of me as the female moderator to not put that in the hoop. But thinking about something that maybe has been on your radar, something that you have been working on in terms of initiatives that have been youth driven, that you've seen in your country, that they're either works in progress or that you've done yourself, to inspire our audience and to help contextualize what these little things are that help improve accountability and better leadership. What are the initiatives that you're working on, or that other people that you know are working on, that have inspired you and you think are effective?
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, sure. Thank you. What I've seen mostly recently in Malawi is just the coming together of young people. Young people not pushing back in questioning maybe people, even their peers or people even in the parties that they support. They're not just going to keep quiet just because it is a political party that they support or a candidate that they supported. They're out there demanding that the right thing being done. They're saying, look, we supported you to get where you are so that you do the right thing. So we are demanding that the right thing be done, rather than just keeping quiet and say, look, I supported you, so if you do something, I can't question you because maybe I'll embarrass you, or maybe people will say, look, you're the ones who put that candidate there. You're the one who put that leader where he is. But young people are no longer just looking. They're saying, we put you there, we are demanding that the right things be done. So this is what I've mostly seen, especially they've been done by mostly our political activists and NGOs, and also on an individual basis. A lot of individuals are now taking it upon themselves to make sure that things are done in the right way, they're done correctly. What they were promised must be delivered. And there's a lot of pushing back against corruption. So these are the initiatives that I think are really helping, and I think are taking up shape a lot.
That reminds me a lot of these different initiatives to how do we improve governance in around the world, but in Africa. And so many of them are improving accountability through harnessing data that is maybe publicly available or less publicly available than it should be, and posting it on Facebook and printing it in the newspaper and posting it wherever people can. So you can see when your MP has spent £1 million on trips to Paris, or you can see where the money is disappearing to. And then that's absolutely something that we all can do to kind of spread that message. Honorable Mike, please.
Right.
Somehow you might be on low volume. Can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Still nothing. So maybe you need to, I don't know, plug it in again. Yeah, that's my tech knowledge right there.
But I was getting
there you
everybody.
are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Then, okay. Yeah. I just wanted to add on what Honorable Mpingajira said, my colleague, about who is enforcing what in this country. I just wanted to add on that this time around, we have got a bigger number of youth as members of parliament in Malawi for the first time in the history of politics. So for the first time again, we have formed a block of youth parliamentarians. We call Youth Caucus, where we are almost close to over 45 members. The idea is to make sure that we don't disappoint those people who elected us, because as my colleague Chief has said, those people who elected us expect a lot from us. So we want to be the first people to act, not waiting for them to act against us. That no, you're not doing the right job that we elected you to do. So we are trying as youth parliamentarians to make sure that we're giving them what we're supposed to give back to the youth and of course the whole community. And now we have also talked about, as members of parliament, the youth parliamentarians, we know that there's resistance in most of the cases when decisions are being made in parliament. So we are quite alert on what our people are looking forward to get from us as members of parliament. And believe me, we are saying that come 2025, when we have another election, it will be difficult for people to vote for members of parliament who are younger if we don't perform. So we are trying that we perform to the satisfaction of these people in our areas, in our localities, so that when it comes to voting next election, people should have confidence in why should we vote for the youth. Okay, Chipiriro Mpinganjira was a member of parliament, he delivered. Mike Bang was a member of parliament, he delivered. And now we can vote for more youth than these other people. So I just wanted to add on that to say that also as members of parliament, we are there again to check on ourselves, so what we are doing for the people because they elected us. That is one point that I wanted to add on what Honorable Chipiriro Mpinganjira said.
That's marvelous. I love the idea that there's a critical mass now of young parliamentarians that you've been able to form your own caucus, and you're trying to get the message back to your constituents about what's actually happening. That's accountability in action, in my opinion. Outside of being an elected official, when I was thinking about this topic, I was really thinking of Mr. Atoto and the movement Not Too Young to Run. A really powerful and important change. Please tell us more about how you came up with that and what happened, please.
Yeah, so just briefly, because I'd like to build on the points that the two members of parliament made. Well, the Not Too Young to Run movement, it's a movement of young people who, pushed for the reduction of age for running for office in Nigeria. Nigeria operates a very rigid constitution. To change or remove an I or cross a T or add a comma, you require, it's a very cumbersome and complex process, so very difficult to amend the constitution. But what young people did was to, change their constitution from their streets, using their cell phones, and by building a strong alliance with a generation that cared about youth inclusion. And so the age for running for office was reduced for the president from 40 to 35. For members of our House of Representatives, because we have a bicameral legislature, it was reduced from 30 to 25. And then for the State House of Assembly, what you call it a county legislature, it was reduced from 30 to 25. And for the first time in our history, since return to democracy in 1999, we have about over 20 young people who are between 25 and 29 who are in parliaments legislating for their people. But I just want to make a fundamental point that this whole discourse around political inclusion or youth participation isn't just an attempt to fulfill a democratic ideal. Yes, democracy talks about inclusion, it talks about participation. But the truth is, if young people do not demonstrate what they want to use political power to do, then it makes no sense, because what's the point of representation if you're unable to lift people out of poverty? What's the point of representation if you're not making laws to provide security for people? What's the point of representation if the whole discourse around solving our infrastructural challenges is not solved? And that is why I love what the two honorable members are doing. And I've been part of this, working with the IPU at the international level on creating youth caucuses across parliaments in Africa. Yiga Africa that I work with, set up one in Liberia, set up another in Ghana. And we're trying to build a network of support. And I want to say that for us as a young people, I don't know how much to say this, but this is a generational burden that we all bear. That there are young people who are in the room today, sitting in our parliament, is a call for responsibility on we who are out of office to support them to succeed. If they don't succeed, like Honorable Mike said, at the next round of elections, they're never going to vote for more young people. So they need to succeed. So leaders actually require support. And we've got to provide them that support as a generation. And we need to consider this as a generational call as a young people. But we also need to be clear on which young people are we talking about. Because across different African countries, young people are classified within different age categories. Some say it's 1835, some say it's 15, some say it's 1529. There's just disparity with the classification of young people by age. Whilst noting that, I think that for the likes of Honorable Mike and Chiporo, who are currently in Parliament, I don't know if they are above 35, But I want to place this call to you guys that you also have a responsibility to open the door for other young people to come into that space. And how you do this is within your political parties. Can parties institute, policies that create spaces for young women, young men, and young persons with disability to hold leadership positions within your parties? Can your parties, push for youth quotas within your parties? But you have a responsibility because you're representing your constituents, no doubt, but you are also carrying an additional burden of representing young people. So open up the space for more young people to come in. Because one thing this old generation have done, and not all of them, but majority of them have done, is they don't uphold that value of intergenerational equity. And we need to become that generation that provides a counter narrative to the current norm. And the responsibility is on you. It's also on other politicians, but it's also on us. But I want to conclude by saying that this discussion cannot make the desired impact if we don't invest in political education. Our young people on the continent need political education. They need to know, what are the institutions of government, their roles and their functions, and how to engage those institutions so they can channel the right questions at the right time to the right institutions. As Honorable Mike and Co would attest, or you've had constituents come to you to make demands that don't fall within your constitutional responsibility. That's the challenge that parliamentarians face across the world, whether you're young or whether you're old. But our people need to be educated to understand the role that these institutions play. They also need some form of education that civic participation or political participation does not start and end with elections. The job and the task of democracy actually begins after elections. And we need to constantly push this narrative and as we mobilize our generation.
Thank you for all of that. I love so much of what you said, but I think the key direction to take it in is which young people are we talking about? So, I mean, there's the urban-rural divide, there's the digital divide, who has access to high-speed internet and electricity and everything like that. There's the disability divide, and of course, there's the gender divide. And that's something that perhaps we can even see on our panels already. You can see in the numbers of who is elected to office. You can see in the numbers of who are the patrons of the upcoming politicians, who is getting these positions in the rosters for upcoming elections. It's not women. It's not women, and we need to see more of them because we're missing out on so much intelligence and opportunity if we're not creating an inclusive environment. So I know all of you can speak to this issue, but I'd love to speak first with Ms. Sakore on how can we get more women, more girls involved in this process and put them in the pipeline for eventual office or, leadership roles otherwise.
I think first, before I answer your question, there are wonderful things that Samson has said that I've written before when we started the conversation, which is the politician's work is done at the ballot, and then the voter's work begins at the ballot, because once he or she is elected, they're done. They move on, they go into their untouchability of political protection and power. And then the voter's work begins because now they start to talk about accountability. Now they want to talk about how to devolve power, what devolved power looks like, and if it works for them or if it doesn't. And that the last thing that he said, which was wonderful, is young people, it's not enough to have young people with autocratic minds in political leadership. And that's a thing that we also struggle with, because we've realized that it doesn't mean you're going to have change or whatever change means in your context and in your country by just having a young person in political leadership. And that's why we have to interrogate the structures. We have to question ideologies, and we have to hold people accountable. And people have to be responsible at some point. And that's why we talk about the judiciary and what the role of the judiciary is. We talk about the role of elective bodies, the people who run the elections. We talk about the roles of NGOs. We talk about the roles of civil society. We talk about the roles of community organizations, and then we talk about the roles of active citizens, you know, who participate in just in just organizing, in educating, in sharing, in disseminating information around what do we do now that we have these new leaders, right? As regards the role of gender and getting more women into office, I think one major thing that we tend to ignore when we talk about gender and political engagement is the role of men in supporting women into political office, because like we've all agreed, politics is a big man's play game, you know. So then we see that even in my country, where the women who get into political office are not necessarily fantastical, with great integrity, with, you know, with the agenda of the community or young people or young men. They don't have that, because they are also endorsed by the godfathers who've held political institutions that are unjust, right? So when they come in, they will continue with that agenda. So it is questioning what is the role of men who have power, and men have political power and political mileage, and how do they wield that power within structures that are able to push and expand space for women, you know? So one is questioning, why are there no women who are making decisions in political parties, and how do we get women there? Because it's not like political parties don't have women, they do. But then women will be pushed aside to the women's caucus, to the youth league organizer, to the secretary of something, to the deputy of somebody else, right? But then you'll never see them as the key decision makers within institutions or within structures of politics and political institutions. And then another thing is questioning the role of money and the role of finances. There's a whole conversation about politics and how politics is such an enriching game to play beyond just playing with people's lives. There are people who benefit by keeping women away, young people away, disabled people away, people with marginalizations, people from vulnerable communities. There are people who benefit from doing that, right? So it is understanding what is the role of money in supporting women tangibly, in enhancing agendas that bring in women, you know. And then number three is the role of media and the public narrative, both in mainstream and also on social, of what it means to be a leader, a young woman in office, what it means to even be a young man in office. Because there's the ageism, which works against all young people. And then there's the fact that you're seen as not experienced. And then you're seen as not having a big name behind you. And then you're seen as not belonging to a big party, or belonging to the right tribe, or belonging to the right religion. Like I could go on and on about the layers of just subjugation, you know? So it is the role of media, and how do we change narratives, and how do we make sure that these narratives start reorienting how people think, people see young people see young women, people see good leadership, right? And then number four is security and politics, and what politics means for women as regards their security. Because one of the things that I know, that a lot of us know in this space, is that visibility is not a woman. You know, if you think of a visible body, you know, it is not a woman. It is a man. It is a man of power. It is a man of eloquence. It is a man who has abilities to open doors and get into spaces. But rarely women are second or other in a space of visibility. Because when a woman is visible, they're easy to target. And you see this with women representatives, even in the US. The more visible they have become, the more easy it is to target them, the more easy it is to troll them, the more easy it is to, you know, to be able to harm them. So how do we ensure that as we are asking women to, hey, come on board, let's change this, we need you, you are half of the population of states, that we're also making sure that they're safe? Because the ways in which political structures are set up, they're not set up to secure women, to make them safe and to make sure they thrive in these positions. So it's harder for women to be in these political spaces. So what are we doing about security, right? And then she's understanding, lastly, that women have to qualify twice for positions they've already earned, and that is because of societal conditioning, of now the patriarchy and the misogyny and the sexism that exists in this space. So even if I was a qualified woman to run for political office and I'm unmarried, someone would come and say, but you know, she speaks so well, she understands the issues, she knows what she needs to do, but is she married? How will she run a constituency without running a home? You know, and if you're married and you don't have children, then it will be, but you're married and you don't have children. How does she teach other people? How does she lead people who have children without her own children? See what I mean? So that's the thing of women are constantly earning something twice beyond just what they've already earned. So then how do we now reorient societies into unlearning the patriarchal ways, the misogynistic ways, the sexism that follows women everywhere? Because now we have a Tanzania female president, and the first thing that people are worried about is, what do we call her husband? Does he lose his power, his position in her life? Something we don't ask when men get into political office and become presidents, right? We don't say, what do we call the wife? We automatically know what we're going to call the wife. You know, does she lose her position? So those are some of the things we need to talk about and engage very honestly and candidly as we talk about enhancing and in increasing women's political participation, because I know women, young women, have been organizing. It's not that women are not there, it's just that they refuse to be recognized, they refuse to be named, and we will see this everywhere, even in the news, where international media, both local and national, will talk about, oh, Nigerian woman wins, as if her parents called her Nigerian woman, you know, Kenyan woman appointed to, women don't even have names. You know, so you look at the basic things in which how women are represented, women are captured, and the narratives around women are formed, and it's deeply, deeply problematic. So I think the first question is, if we have women, which we, of course, we do have women in political structures, why are we refusing to see them? Why are we refusing to give them their rightful place? Why are we refusing to enhance their power and their roles?
I think that was enough for a seminar right there. Thank you. I know I have absolutely dominated this discussion. I have been checking the Q&A box. Nothing has been posted, but just in case, I would love to hear from our audience. What has this discussion inspired? What are the hot questions that people are thinking about? Is there a way for me to do this? Oh, here we go. So Roy Randon is asking, from his experience, there is fervent support among young people on the continent for older politicians who have a reputation for bad governance and authoritarianism. As a Zimbabwean, I have had many disheartening conversations with fellow young Africans who are passionate supporters of our former president, Robert Mugabe, but conveniently never have had to live under his ruinous rule. I believe this is largely due to the prevalence of misinformation among youth on the continent. How can we combat this? And do you agree with the premise of the question? Would somebody care to take that one?
I could try. I think when we unpack leadership that has existed for as long as Mugabe existed in Zimbabwe, and seeing what he did or what he didn't do, and understanding that human beings will always often lean towards the familiar, and sometimes being subjugated, being led by a terrible leader is the familiar, and it's what you know, because everything else seems impossible and seems utopian, right? So for example, in my country, we had a president who served for 24 years, and we were a one-party state, and nobody ever imagined that we could have a multi-party state, right? Where we have more political representation now that we find good for ourselves. But that's the thing about reimagination, and that's the thing about having the ability to reimagine countries and to reimagine leadership beyond what you know. That's the role of I think that's the role of youth in its essence, to be courageous enough to think about the things that we are not already seeing currently. So with Zimbabwe, and like with my country, when that happened, it was coming together and people figuring out, how do we then start seeing ourselves out of just the construct of what has been put together? Because remember that all these autocratic leaders exist within a construct, and that construct is put together and held together by systems, right? So then when we start questioning the role of the judiciary, for example, in the Zimbabwe that Mugabe ran, what was their role? How did they help him be able to hold on to power for as long as he did? If we look at civil society, he had probably at some point strangled all of them and denied them space to exist in an independent way. If you look at citizens at that time, right? So understanding that autocratic leadership is not just the fact that a leader flexes power, wills power, but it's also a conditioning, you know, that they make you think and imagine and feel and strongly believe that you cannot have better, that it's impossible to want better, that it's impossible to dream of better. But then that's the role of young people now. That's our role, to be able to make people believe and see and start reimagining that we could have better. We could have systems that care for us. We could have systems that work for the most vulnerable. You know, we could have systems that understand that economic stabilities are not just supposed to work for the billionaires in our countries, right? So that's it. It's understanding conditioning and the role of conditioning and how that is held together by systems. And that's why I think it's so important for us to understand the balance between those who go into active political engagement and people like Samson who say, we still want citizens to also play the active engagement within or without the periphery of political power, you know, so there's a balance. I think that's part of the answer. Of course, I don't have all the answers to the question.
I think that was a solid answer. Thank you very much for all of those thoughts. Chazelle Povedano has been very active. Thank you, Chazelle, for being such an active participant. One of the questions she's posing to the panel that is particularly interesting is the role of youth and of the diaspora, especially of those people who have left the continent when they were too young or the second generation immigrants abroad. What role do they have to play in youth political and activist movements across the continent? Perhaps one of our other panelists can tackle that one.
Well, I can do that. So, okay, Honorable, you know, I see Honorable wanted to speak. You are my leader, so I'll cede the floor to you.
Thank you, Samson. I will just chip in a little. Samson, with his organization that he runs, is I'm sure more exposed to that question. But I just wanted to chip in and say, look, sometimes the exposure that we get is important. Being out there, diaspora, mixing with different people. It doesn't have to be different people from Europe. It can be different people from Africa who are in Europe. You share, you're looking from the outside, looking into your countries and seeing where things are going wrong and comparing things with each other. It's different when I'm in Malawi. Most of the people I'm engaging with are Malawians. But when you're out there in the diaspora, you find yourself engaging with other Africans, you share ideas. So the people who are not in Africa, they should not feel left out. They should feel that they have a lot to give. Like we've been saying, we need the support. We need to be told where things are not going well. We need to be shown what the alternatives are. So sometimes because may be lagging behind in some issues, in technology, those in the diaspora can help us in those areas. Bring in the technology that is needed. Bring in ways for young people to get engaged. Show young people who look down on themselves in their home countries that, look, you don't have to look down on yourselves. You can do it. Everyone can do it. You can make it. So that's what I wanted just to say, to encourage those out there, not just to look and feel they don't belong. They will be around, but they belong and got a role to play.
Thank you. I think we could add on to that answer, but before we add on to it, another one of Chazelle's question kind of bridges the divide of the diaspora because so much of their involvement is digital in a lot of cases. What's the role of digitalization and communication technologies in this changing technological universe that we live in, and politics? In my experience, there's a lot of message boards, there's the Facebook groups, there's the WhatsApp groups that are throwing maybe provocative, maybe positive messages around the world at the speed of a touch. And we've got all of this new ways to campaign, to spread your message, to maybe share misinformation, or maybe organize a protest. So there's the positives and the negatives. Perhaps Samson, you could share what you're seeing as the role of digitalization and the changing communications in politics today.
No, I completely agree with the point Honorable Chipuro made. And the truth is, first, you need transnational networks to impact on, how politics is played and also governance on the continent of Africa. And I think that Africans in diaspora have a critical role to play. This conversation we're having was planned and designed by young people who are students of this prestigious university. I think forcing this conversation at an international level is one way Africans in diaspora can, contribute to the development of the continent. And so we need to encourage more African students in tertiary institutions across the world to hold these discussions, explore pathways of shaping and rethinking, leadership and politics on the continent of Africa. There's also, investments in research. And I also would urge, African students in diaspora to invest, in academic research around these issues. Yes, we know there's a political economy of knowledge management across the world and how Africa is disadvantaged. But you've got an opportunity wherever you are, to fly that Africa nationalistic flag that you have. The second point is international solidarity. And if you look all through the movements that we've mentioned in this discussion, whether it's Free Senegal, NSAS, you'll see that other Africans, and not just Africans, folks around the world, when those protests were going on in Africa, they also, went to the street in solidarity, with Africans during their time of challenge. So this is a culture we need to encourage, promoting that solidarity, identifying with the struggles that Africans have, establishing those connections, because what you do is you inspire, this movement in Africa, and they feel that they are not alone in the course of their struggle. So it's important. Let's continue to encourage, international solidarity. The third point is around accountability. Yeah, because Africa is not in isolation. It's important that we encourage that culture of influencing international institutions to take decisions in favor of Africa. So if you've got the UN, you've got the EU, if you've got Africans who are in these countries where these institutions are, I think it's an opportunity to engage to push African agenda and those institutions, because, to be honest, most decisions and choices that are being made are made in these multilateral institutions. And if we can galvanize and influence decisions at that international level, it can have some impact on what happens in Africa, be it on trade, be it economy, be it security, cyber security. There are just lots of connections. But I'll also say that for Africans who are in the diaspora, it's important to note that, yes, beyond repatriation of funds, or what we call foreign direct investments to help African economies, we need to encourage the culture of voting. We know that some countries have diaspora voting, some countries don't. Shamefully, my country, Nigeria, does not encourage diaspora voting, and I hope that we amend our constitution to enable Nigerians in diaspora vote. But please participate in the politics of your country, and technology can really help us do that. Either voting, absentee voting, or diasporas voting across the world. So these are, opportunities. But I would also want to conclude by saying technology has breached a lot of gaps. And if there's one, very important advantage of technology, is just acquiring information and knowledge about the continent and what's happening on the continent. So it's not difficult, to know and get information about what's happening in South Africa, what's happening in Uganda. Please use these tools to equip yourself with the knowledge that you need, to keep yourself abreast with what's happening on the continent of Africa. But I think there's a value in that, and this discussion we're having, the fact that it was organized by African students who are in Johns Hopkins, it's something that is unprecedented and should be encouraged. Over.
Thank you. I wanted to end with a rapid fire round because I know that you are the definition of busy people. So I know you've all got somewhere else that you need to be, but that was so many takeaways for us to take right there. But just to wrap it up, I wanted to finish with one of our organizers' questions, Atanouk. So she's asking us, what role do you see for young Africans who may not necessarily want to be politicians, but want to support the cause and not build organizations like Samson and Toto? Combined with, what is one thing we should have on our radar going forward from this talk? What's one takeaway? So feel free to answer both of those or answer one of those. But what's one thing we should be doing, especially if you are from the continent and want to be involved, / what is one thing that all of us should be taking away from the discussion today? Perhaps Honorable Mike could start us off. I think you're muted. Sorry,
Okay.
still muted.
Yeah, you can hear me now. First of all, I just want to start with the question somebody asked about should those people who are abroad can be taking part in voting. Yeah, of course, it's quite a good thing, but with the technological challenges that most of the African countries have, for example, Malawi, I don't think that that can work. It will take ages for some of the countries to adopt that. It has been a good discussion. What I just wanted to say, because I joined very late, was for those people who are outside in diaspora, they are useful people because as we have done today, you know, people would believe much in those people who are staying outside their country than those in the country. If I was competing with a young guy, let's say he was in the US or he was in South Africa doing some good business or some education, and he came back home and participated in politics, I think he would have had an upper hand because most of the people believe that those people who are well exposed can be better in leading their constituents. So that is one thing that I wanted to talk about. As we go, I know maybe we'll be inviting us next time. This is our first time taking part in such a discussion. Samson has given us some hints. He has elaborated well. And our lady in Nigeria also has given us some insights that we will be working on. I think Chip and I will be meeting again next week and to see what we have gained here and what we can share to our over 40 members of parliament in the youth caucus. Yeah, that's what I can say as of now.
Thank you, Honorable Mike. Honorable Chipolero, what are your final thoughts?
Thank you so much again for, thank you for the opportunity. I think in terms of participation for those who are not in politics or those who do not want to build their own organizations, is that there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do, as Shefa said at the start. There's a lot of interconnection. There are a lot of things we can do that are connected with each other that can push the youth agenda. And to repeat what I said about just the support, just the encouragement, just a line somewhere supporting Samson's organization will give him the strength to keep going. I want also to take the American model, where I think people keep on, they give a lot to their candidates or to organizations or causes that they believe in. They don't give too much. They give $5, $10, $20, $50. But because there are a lot of people giving to the causes that they believe in, or to their political parties, or to organizations as Samson does or heads, that thing goes a long way. So we should not think that holding office or opening up the organization is the only way. There are ways where that we can help. Shefa writes. She is also doing quite a number of other things. So just to highlight and add on that there's a lot of things that we can do. From this discussion, I've definitely picked up a number of things from the other panelists, a number of things that are being done, a number of ideas, and I would definitely be looking to link up more, engage more with these African thinkers and to see how we can work as Africans. And of course, it's a global village now. I'm not going to exclude you, Mary. We'll work with you too. So all of us have got the same thing that we're looking to do. So it has been a discussion. I some issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chipolero. I love that message of putting our money where our mouth is.
That's right.
Ms. Akore, what can you give us as final thoughts?
Our final thoughts. What should young people be doing beyond just being elected as political leaders or those who are not interested in active politics? I think there's a lot to do. One is the umbrella of it all is they can support in building the ecosystems within which politics and political discourse exists. So they can support organizations that are doing political work. They can hold spaces that they have now with the platforms that they have and start shifting the narratives. Like I said, the narrative has to change, and there are people who have to do the narrative changing. So they have to teach what new narratives can look like. They have to write about it. They have to share about it on podcasts. They have to speak about it on media. You know, they have to share about it within institutions that they exist now, be it school, be it friendship spaces. They have to start talking about what they are imagining for their futures and for the future of political spaces. And then, of course, if they can fund, it's fantastic to fund organizations that exist and are doing this work. And then there's always the old thing of just ask what people need. You know, you can always just call organizations and say, hey, I admire what you're doing. It seems fantastic. I'm not cut out for the jugular, but I would love to support. I would love to volunteer. Volunteer your time, volunteer your skills, volunteer your money, volunteer your spaces. If you have spaces that you've created amongst friends that you share stuff, invite the people who are doing this work to come in and teach you more about what they're doing and share more about what they're doing, that helps. So there's a lot of work to be done. They can help with mobilizing, community organizing. They don't have to be the faces of the things, but they can help. And lastly, what can people take away from this? Beyond just everything I've taken away, learning from the young politicians and everybody else in the audience. I think the biggest thing I always take away is that politics is for people and not for politicians, and that people become politicians. So that understanding and the clarity of knowing that kind of humbles me always, and makes me realize that any other day we can always replace the bad people that turned into terrible politicians and get newer people in, and we shouldn't be afraid of running out of, of good people, because I think the world is not in a deficit of good people. There's a lot of good people who want to be in these spaces, who want to lead, who want to shape ideas, who want to shape policy, who want to shape governance. So I think understanding that politics is for people, and it's for very ordinary people. And as ordinary as we can make it, the better for all of us. So yeah, that's my biggest takeaway.
And that's beautifully big. Politics is for the people. We can connect, we can amplify voices, and we can be involved. Love it. And Mr. Atoto, I know you already gave us a lot of insights. Any final insights?
No, Shefa and the other two MPs spoke about what can be done. I just want to add, and maybe just sound a bit controversial, will be why why anyways, let me take that back. But I think that when people say not being politicians, and I'll say politics determines everything, right? So you can be a member of a political party and you're not a politician. So I would encourage that one thing you can do is join a political party, influence, changes within the parties, because within the continent of Africa, lots of young people don't want to join political parties. But in the US, you see young people are either Democrats or they're Republicans. And so we need to encourage young people to become members of political parties. And Shefa's party in Kenya is one of those progressive parties that if you're a Kenyan, I will encourage you to be a part of. My final thoughts and perhaps takeaway will be that regardless of where you find yourself, regardless of where you stand, you need to note that negotiating for political space from an age point of view is not a sustainable model. We lose the debate and the discussion where we negotiate for political space based on our age. It's going to be about value that you add. So whether you are in a political party or you're out of the political party, please always aspire to add value. When you add value, that door would remain open for you. And so that's something that I'm taking from here. That yes, whilst we're a generation of buzzwords, we're a generation of social media, but we must note buzzwords don't win elections, tweets don't win elections, Facebook posts and Instagram posts don't win elections. Our electoral commissions don't count this tweets and Facebook posts on election day, they count votes. And so whilst we speak about representation, young people should go out and cast their votes because the level of youth turnout for elections on the continent is poor.
Wonderful. I think we have at least one or two future leaders, parliamentarians, maybe a president or two in this audience, or maybe among our panelists, who knows. So we have been given so much food for thought as we walk away from today's panel. So thank you so much to Honorable Chipolero, Honorable Mike, Mr. Samson Utoto, and Ms. Schaefer-Akori. You have given us so much to think about, and we truly appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again in the not too distant future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, no matter wherever you are.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.